The pen slipped from his hand, hitting the marble desk with a hollow tap that seemed louder than the ticking clock above us. My breath froze. The gold-embossed contract in front of me wasn't just another piece of corporate paperwork. It carried a signature I knew too well. My name is Celine Hart. I'm 26. And I have to ask, how many times can one woman survive being blindsided by the people she loves most? The signature on that line was neat, practiced. My mother's name, signed in her flowing hand, stared back at me. She had abandoned me a decade ago, walking out with nothing but a suitcase and the promise she'd find herself. I hadn't seen her since. Now here it was, her ink woven into a deal worth more than anything I could imagine. "Sir," I whispered, my voice trembling, but sharp enough to slice the room in two. "That's my mother's signature." The billionaire, a man known for his composure, leaned back, his face drained to ash. The fluorescent lights caught the sweat beading on his temple. "Impossible," he muttered, but he didn't meet my eyes. His jaw locked as if he'd been caught trespassing in his own empire. I wanted to ask what this contract meant, why my mother's name was tied to his company, why fate had dragged her ghost across my desk. But the silence between us was heavier than any words. The chair beside me creaked as though it was waiting for me to sit and steady myself. My fingers hovered over the contract, every curve of her handwriting pulling me deeper into a past I had tried to bury. For the first time in years, I realized my mother hadn't just left me. She'd signed her name onto something that still had the power to dismantle me. And as his pen rolled slowly to the floor, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The pen stopped against my shoe. I didn't move to pick it up. Neither did he. The air in that glass-walled lobby thickened until I could hear my own pulse louder than the ringing phones behind me. He finally spoke. "Where did you say you were from, Miss Hart?" His voice was calm, but the kind of calm that hides a storm. I swallowed. From nowhere, that matters. It wasn't the truth, but it was safer than letting him know the town, the house, the history I'd buried. My mother's history. He tapped the contract, not touching the signature. "This paper should never have been on your desk. I'll handle it." But he didn't handle it. He shoved it into his leather briefcase like it was radioactive. His hand trembled before the latch clicked shut. I wanted to demand answers, but the words stuck. Instead, my eyes landed on the recurring symbol I hadn't noticed before. A red silk scarf tucked in his breast pocket. The same shade my mother used to wear tied around her hair, fluttering behind her when she left me at the train station that final morning. It couldn't be coincidence. He cleared his throat. "You'll forget what you saw. That's best for both of us." Forget? As if my mother's ghost had just signed her way back into my life, and I could file it away like another expense report. He adjusted his cufflinks, but I caught the slip. His knuckles were white, his jaw flexing hard enough to crack a tooth. When he finally walked toward the revolving doors, I wasn't relieved. I was shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity that my mother wasn't gone. She was hidden inside something worth billions, and he was terrified I had just uncovered it. I sat frozen behind the desk long after the glass doors spun him out into the city. My headset buzzed, phones rang, footsteps echoed, but all I saw was that crimson scarf in his pocket, the way it mirrored hers. I remembered being 16, standing in the station as she tied hers tightly around her throat, the fabric catching the morning wind. "Some things you'll never understand, Celine," she had whispered before stepping onto that train. She hadn't turned back. And now, 10 years later, her signature had resurfaced under the pen of a billionaire. The next morning he returned, earlier than anyone else. His presence swallowed the lobby before the security lights had even warmed. He placed a coffee on my desk, my exact order, down to the caramel drizzle. "You didn't see anything yesterday," he said, his tone smoother now, but his eyes restless. "People misread signatures all the time." I stared at him. It wasn't misread. He leaned in, close enough that I caught the faint scent of cologne and something sharper beneath it, fear. Celine, if you value your position here, you'll let this drop. My fingers tightened around the warm cup. He knew my name without ever asking. He knew more than he should. I never told you my last name, I whispered. For the first time, he faltered. His polished exterior cracked, just slightly. The mask slipped, and in that sliver I saw something darker than business secrets. The scarf's edge peeked from his suit again, taunting me like a red flag waving on a battlefield. That was when I understood. My mother hadn't just vanished into thin air. She was still tethered to this man, this empire, this paper trail worth more than anything I could imagine. And if he wanted silence, I suddenly knew my voice was worth more than I'd ever realized. The coffee grew cold in my hands, but I couldn't drink it. Every sip felt like a trap. That afternoon, I caught him in the conference hall with the board. He spoke in sharp bursts, commanding, but when his gaze flickered toward me at the door, his words stumbled. The others didn't notice. I did. When the meeting broke, I pretended to shuffle papers. He passed by, his voice low. Curiosity ruins more than cats, Celine. I smiled, though my pulse hammered. And secrets build empires, don't they? His stride faltered, just a fraction. Enough to confirm I wasn't wrong. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out my old shoebox of keepsakes. Tucked inside, brittle with age, was a Polaroid of my mother wearing that same red silk scarf, standing in front of a building with the company's logo, decades before I even knew it existed. My stomach turned. She had been here before me. Maybe she never really left. The next morning, a plain envelope sat on my reception desk. No name, no return address. Inside, a copy of the contract I'd glimpsed, circled in red ink around her signature, and one line scribbled beneath it in hurried handwriting. She's alive. Don't trust him. My knees nearly buckled. I scanned the lobby. No one looked at me. Everyone carried on. But I felt watched, like the glass walls were mirrors and eyes pressed against the other side. For the first time, I realized I wasn't chasing answers anymore. Someone was feeding them to me. And if my mother's ghost wasn't a ghost at all, then the man who dropped his pen at my desk had every reason to fear what came next. I tucked the envelope into my blazer before anyone noticed. My hand shook as if the paper itself was alive. She's alive. The words seared into me, louder than the hum of printers, louder than the lobby chatter. At lunch, I slipped outside into the courtyard, the city's noise crashing around me. A drizzle had started, faint but steady, dotting the marble benches. I unfolded the contract again, tracing her name, my mother's loops, her unmistakable flourish on the H. Pretty paper, isn't it? A voice murmured. I spun. A woman I'd never seen stood by the fountain, scarf knotted loosely around her wrist, red silk, faded with time. Not her, but close enough to steal my breath. You dropped that, she said, sliding a duplicate envelope onto the bench. Don't ask who I am. Just know he's not who he says. Her gaze cut through me. Then she vanished into the crowd before I could speak. Back inside, my boss, the billionaire, waited at my desk. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled, but the scarf remained tucked into his pocket like armor. He leaned over the counter. Did you receive anything unusual today? His voice was too calm, too measured. I held my breath. Just the usual bills. His eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. Testing. Measuring. Finally, he smiled, thin and humorless. Good. Keep it that way. When he walked away, I noticed the faintest tear along the edge of his scarf. Threads frayed as if pulled too many times. The image burned into me, the same detail in the old Polaroid of my mother. The scarf wasn't a coincidence. It was a connection. And suddenly, revenge didn't feel like an option I was stumbling toward. It felt like an inheritance I had just discovered. I couldn't sleep. The city pulsed outside my window, but inside, silence pressed against my chest. I laid both envelopes on the table, side by side. 2 contracts, 2 copies of the same signature. my mother's hand looping across both pages as if she'd only signed them yesterday. And then that scarf. Always the scarf. In every memory, every photo, every encounter since he walked into my life. It wasn't fashion. It was a chain. By morning, I decided if he wanted silence, I would give him its opposite. I arrived early, before the office buzz began, sliding into the executive archives. Thanks to the key card I borrowed from an absent-minded manager, I searched through rows of fireproof cabinets. The smell of dust and leather filled the room. My fingers landed on a file older than me. Inside, a black and white photograph of the board of directors years ago. And there she was, my mother, younger, poised, standing directly beside him. The same scarf around her neck, the same tilt of her chin. Not a receptionist, not an outsider. She'd been one of them. A noise cracked behind me, his voice soft but dangerous. I told you to forget. I spun, file still open in my hands. He stepped into the dim light, his scarf catching the glow like a warning flare. Why her? My voice broke, not with fear, but fury. Why is she in your company history? Why is she still signing your contracts? His lips tightened. Because she built this empire before you were even born, and she's still building it in ways you're not ready to understand. The file slipped from my trembling hands, pages scattering like leaves. And in that moment, I understood the truth he was too afraid to say out loud. My mother had never left me. She had left for him. The words lodged in my throat like glass. She hadn't left me for freedom, or for herself. She had left for him. For this empire. He bent, gathering the scattered pages, his movements precise, almost reverent, as if history itself might shatter if handled too roughly. Your mother was my partner, he said, voice low, deliberate. She signed her name because, without her, none of this exists. You should be proud. Proud. My laugh came out sharp, hollow. She abandoned her daughter to play queen in your empire. His gaze didn't waver. Everything has a cost. She paid hers, and now you'll pay yours if you keep pressing. Something in me snapped. For years, I'd imagined my mother as a wanderer, a ghost drifting somewhere unknown. But here, in the sterile archive room, I saw the truth. She had traded me like currency, her name inked in contracts, her scarf a symbol of loyalty, her silence the price of power. The scarf, my motif, my torment, seemed to burn in my vision. His, hers, now mine. The threads tied me into this legacy whether I wanted them or not. I stepped closer. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should forget. But contracts leave trails. Paper burns, but copies remain. People talk. And silence. I leaned in, letting the words curl sharp against his ear. Silence only grows louder when someone tries to bury it. For the first time he flinched. I gathered the scattered documents into my bag. As I walked past him, I felt his eyes burning into me, calculating, fearful. He had built a kingdom on secrets, but I now held the keys. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't suffocate me. It armed me. I knew exactly how my revenge would begin. The following week, I walked into the office with steady hands and a quiet heart. The scarf I wore was red, my mother's exact shade. It fluttered lightly against my coat as though the fabric itself had finally chosen sides. I didn't confront him in boardrooms. I didn't raise my voice in the lobby. Instead, I went to the one place louder than any threat, the courthouse. The file I'd stolen, the duplicate contracts, the Polaroid, even the anonymous envelope. I turned them over to a lawyer who specialized in corporate fraud. I signed my name clean and firm across the statement. Not hers, mine. 2 weeks later, the story hit the financial press. Anonymous whistleblower exposes billionaire empire built on forged signatures. The headline burned across every screen in the lobby as employees gathered, whispering wide-eyed. He walked in that morning, scarf immaculate, chin high. But when the receptionist's phone rang and the reporter on the line asked for comment, his mask finally cracked. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I simply placed my red scarf on the desk between us. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked to it, and I knew he understood who had undone him. My mother's name would no longer shield him. Her silence could no longer protect him, and my silence, weaponized, had become the undoing of the empire they'd built together. Later that night, I stood alone in my apartment. I tied the scarf one last time around my throat, not as her daughter, not as his pawn, but as Celine Hart, a woman who had finally chosen her own inheritance, truth. The chair in the corner looked as if it had been waiting for me all along. And for once I sat without trembling.